Hey guys, what's up? My name is Zach, and today I'll be doing an election prediction between Sherrod Brown, the current senator from the state of Ohio, versus Donald Trump, the current U.S. president, in a hypothetical 2020 election scenario. So overall, Sherrod Brown, I think, would do pretty well against Trump, better than most candidates, or at least better than the the recent candidates I've done of Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton. And this is mainly because of his association with the state of Ohio, his association with the Rust Belt in general. But he also doesn't have the same name recognition as President Donald Trump, and I really think that that will be one big negative for him if he is the hypothetical candidate for the Democrats in 2020. Another obvious negative for him is going to be his lack of appeal to minorities, which I've said in the past over and over and over again that the Democrats need in order to win elections safely in their column. So we're just going to run through the safe states, and then I'll cover each state as is. So West Coast, as always. Arizona would not be safe. Nope, neither would Colorado. Arizona would not be safe for the Republicans in this election. Neither would that second district or Texas. Like I said, I think Sherrod Brown would do better than most other Democrats. He's known to be a very outspoken Democrat, a Democrat who's not afraid to get his hands dirty, which is something that the Democratic Party, I think, needs in general, but I don't know if Sherrod Brown is the candidate for them or not. But let's just run through the state-by-state basis. The first state I'm going to talk about is New Mexico. Let me just switch the color palette first. I believe this state would go likely to Sherrod Brown, and that call is mostly as a result of his lack of minority and Hispanic appeal, which I think is the only way to make the state solid in Democrats' column, so as a result to be likely. Same with Colorado. I think that Sherrod Brown could appeal to the voters here, mostly because I think that Ohio and Colorado voters share much of the same, so for that reason I call it likely in his column. Texas I would call likely for Trump. I think the only way to make the state even slightly competitive is for the Democrat to be a minority, like Julian Castro. I believe that Texas, that's the only time I've made Texas a lean state for the Republicans rather than likely, as I typically have, is in the case for Julian Castro, mostly because of his Hispanic origin and as a Texan native. So that would be likely in Trump's case. Georgia, I would also consider likely for the same logic for Texas, except for the African-American vote. Sherrod Brown could nominate a African-American vice president if he is the Democratic candidate. I think it's the only way to make the state more competitive than it already is if the Democrat is a African American, or if he nominates an African American vice president. But in this case, I'm just going to go by Sherrod Brown as a person, and he would not. Most likely, he would not win the state of Georgia. As for Virginia, I'm going also for this election. This is the first 2020 election that I'll be basing off of the most recent polls taken in June 2018. Prior to this, I've been using the April 2018 polls, but now this is more recent. And one definitive change that Virginia has become not much more, but a significant amount more competitive for the Democrats. Michigan has also become even more Michigan now has a higher approval of Donald Trump than Wisconsin does, which is kind of surprising. Iowa is now more competitive. I've called that state likely in almost every single prediction. That will no longer be the case for most 2020 predictions. So, yeah, that's just to name a few. I'm sure there's more. But Virginia would be likely as a result of Sherrod Brown's lack of African-American vote, but still being a Democratic-based state. Minnesota would also be likely in Sherrod Brown's column. We saw the state go to Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I think that as a result of Donald Trump's low approval rating in the state, which still holds firm, and Sherrod Brown's overall appeal to the Rust Belt, which I think is his best quality in terms of the electorate, would make the state go likely in his column. North Carolina, I consider that state to be likely in Trump's column. I think that it could become a bit more competitive if the tax cuts enacted by the Republican Party back in 2017 are going to be dug back up again during the 2020 election, and I believe Trump's... Actually, let me clarify if Trump's approval is... Oh yeah, it is low. It's 3, the same as Ohio, actually, so this state this state could be even closer in other predictions. But for this one, Sherrod Brown doesn't come from the South. I don't think he can have great appeal to African Americans here. I think his best appeal in the state will be towards the white, affluent, suburban voters, and I don't think that's enough, so for that reason I call it likely in Trump's column. Just a second. Okay, Arizona I would also call likely in Trump's column. This state has a very low approval of Trump, but I think that the only way for a Democrat to win this state is to appeal to the Hispanic vote, which I don't think Sherrod Brown can do unless he maybe nominates a Hispanic vice president like Julian Castro. But like I said, I'm just looking at it at Sherrod Brown as a person, not his potential vice presidential choice. So for that reason, I currently call Arizona likely for Trump. Now to Maine. That first electoral vote would be safe in Brown's column. But as for the second district, I would consider that likely in Trump's column. I think that Sherrod Brown could do pretty well in the Northeast overall. I think in Ohio, Democratic politician could have good appeal to people in New Hampshire and people in Maine. I think he could do that pretty well. And as for the two at-large electoral votes, I'd call that likely in Sherrod Brown's column. Same for New Hampshire, I'd call that likely in Sherrod Brown's column. And that's just because, actually let me clarify if his approval is, yeah, it's very low here. Jeez, okay, I'm going to have to take that in consideration more often. Sherrod Brown's approval is very low in, not Sherrod Brown, Donald Trump's approval is very low in New Hampshire, and Brown being a senator from Ohio, I think could appeal to voters here as well, so for that reason I would call this state as likely Sherrod Brown. And now for Iowa. This is a state that I think Brown could appeal to, being from the Rust Belt, being from Ohio in particular, and looking at Trump's current approval in the state, which has gone down since April. I would call this just as a lean in Trump's column. I believe that Sherrod Brown could very well take the state if he were to pull off a pretty good campaign here, if he were to pull off a good grassroots campaign, which I've said in the past is necessary in order to win Iowa. And Pennsylvania, I would call this state a lean in Sherrod Brown's column. I believe that being from Ohio, he could bring over some mid-state voters, which Democrats do need in order to win, not just from Philadelphia and the more urban locations, but they do need to get some voters from the more suburban locations as well. I believe Sherrod Brown can do that. I think that his only fault in this state, which is why I'm calling it as a lean and not a likely, is his lack of minority appeal and his lack of name recognition overall. Okay, Nevada, I would call this state as lean Sherrod Brown, and this is mostly just because of his lack of minority appeal and the fact that, as we can see in the most recent polls, Nevada has a -8, which is 8 points less than, it's a 42% approval rating, I believe, for Donald Trump, which is a lot lower than it was when I was currently making calls for Nevada. So for that reason, I would call Nevada a lean in Brown's column. I think that the only way to make this state even more solidly in the Democrats' column is to nominate a Hispanic candidate. Nebraska's 2nd district, I believe Sherrod Brown can win here, and this is because he, being a senator from Ohio, I believe that he shares many of the values as the people of Omaha, aka the 2nd district of Nebraska, does, and I believe he could pull off a victory here. Also, given the fact that Trump's approval in Omaha is very low, I'm pretty sure lower than 50%. Now for Florida, I believe I'd call this state narrowly in Trump's, not narrowly, I believe it'd be a lean in Trump's column. The only reason I'd call it as narrow is just because it's a flip state overall, but Sherrod Brown is not from the South. Sherrod Brown cannot appeal to Hispanic voters, he cannot appeal to whatever Democratic base does exist down here, and I believe this state would be lost if Sherrod Brown was the nominee, just because he does not represent the appeal that Democratic candidates should have in Florida. So for that reason, I would call the state in Trump's column. Michigan, I would call narrowly to Sherrod Brown. Not narrowly. I mean, the only reason it's close is because the approval has gone down here, but it's still 42%. It's still a low approval rating of Trump, but like I said, no African-American support, which I believe you do need here. He does have good working-class support and Rust Belt support, in general, like the typical white working class support that you would see in the Rust Belt, but no name recognition, no minority appeal, and a 42% approval rating, which is higher than most states, typically Democratic states are. I call this state narrowly in Sherrod Brown's column. And Ohio, his home state, I believe would be close. Let me just clarify here. -3, that's just a 47% approval rating of Donald Trump, which may be below 50, but it's higher than most states overall. But Sherrod Brown does have a definitive home state advantage, so for that reason I call the state narrowly in Sherrod Brown's column, making him the next president of the United States in this hypothetical election scenario. He can appeal to the white working class here. You don't really need a whole lot of minority support in order to win Ohio. They don't have a huge minority population. You just need white working class support, and Sherrod Brown definitely has that, combined with his home state advantage, could overcome the Trump base that is pretty strong in the state, which makes him the next president. And the last state I'll call is Wisconsin, which will be narrowly in Sherrod Brown's column for essentially the same arguments that have been made for the other Rust Belt states. Good working class appeal. There's not a huge minority base in this state to turn out to begin with, so he doesn't really have to worry about that when it comes to Wisconsin. And the fact that if we're looking at the approval, it's a -13 approval in this state, which is very low. Lower than Michigan, which is surprising considering that Wisconsin is seen by most to be a more Republican state than Michigan. So for that reason, it'd be a lean in Sherrod Brown's column. Overall, as you can see, Sherrod Brown does win, but there are a few states that he is at risk at losing, as you can see by the Rust Belt, which Trump, and if Trump wins in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, which he very well could, and Nevada. Nevada is another state that could very well go in his column instead. He could overtake Sherrod Brown, but as you can see, the election is currently in Sherrod Brown's column. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I think I'm trying to be more organized in general for these election prediction videos. I hope that was seen in this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. See ya.